Good morning, everybody. Here we are for chapter 5. We're going to look at species interactions, ecological succession, and population control. Specifically today, though, we are going to look at the species interactions. We're going to start off with our case study. As we're very familiar with now, chapters always start off with a case study. Great way to look at something very specific, how a lot of things tie in together. We're looking at the southern sea otter back here. Yeah, sea otters, cute little creatures floating on their backs, eating their food, taking care of their young, etc. Well, right now they're doing okay, but there was a time they almost became extinct. Now these guys live in the giant kelp forest in the Pacific coast. Kelp, like a type of seaweed, grows up in these really huge, long chains where there's a lot of it, and they live in and out, among it, feed, live their whole lives there. They were hunted almost to extinction in the 1900s. There was a partial recovery, was listed as of like 1977, and you're kind of outside of there being cute. Why do we care about the sea otter? Well, it turns out that they're going to be one of these keystone species. They kind of are the keepers. They protect these kelp beds. They eat a lot of the sea urchins. Sea urchins feed on the kelp beds, but down at the bottom, they tend to clip them and snip them off and wind up destroying the kelp beds if it weren't for the sea otters, because the sea otters feed on them. One of these species interactions, a predator-prey relationship. So we care about them because they're a keystone species. A lot of people, just the sheer ethics of it. It seems wrong for humans to simply wipe out an entire species for no real good reason. Once again, we were just hunting them for their fur. It's really nice fur. So we see an ethical issue with it. And also, for off the coast of Southern California, they bring in a lot of tourism dollars. A lot of people come there really just to go out and see the sea otters. So some of the reasons to look at it, and we'll talk about the sea otters as predator-prey relationship and what they do for the kelp forest as we go through the chapter. But let's go ahead and kind of dive right into these species interactions. I'm going to list them off here real quick. There are basically 5. Now in reality, there could be a lot more, but this makes up something like well over 95% of all things would fit into these 5. So they're the ones we're going to hit on. Once again, today's lesson should be largely review for you. You should have seen this before, be somewhat familiar. The idea here is let's bring it back to that frontal lobe for our memory. The first one is interspecific competition, just competition between organisms for air, food, space, etc. Then there is predation, known as predator-prey. We have parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. Now, personally, this is just me. You're not going to see this in the textbook here or there. I remember all of these relationships based off of a harm-benefit. I use those kind of 2 words to let me know when I think about it, say, which is this? Or if I'm reading a scenario and I have to find out what kind of relationship is it, this is where I go to. Harm-benefit. Are they both getting harmed? Are they both getting benefit? One getting a benefit, one getting a harm, something like this. So I'm going to start each one off with that simple definition. Competition. My definition for competition is harm, harm. Because in true competition, nobody gets what they really want. We're both trying to get this same thing. Either one of us gets it and one of us don't, or we both get a part of it. Neither gets exactly what they want. So in true competition, it's a harm-harm situation. Now, we're talking about interspecific competition. This is between species. I'm not talking about the same species going for the same thing. That's intra-specific. We're talking about interspecific. So between different species for the same or limited resources. Like we all want to live in the same forest, or we all actually like to eat insects, or we all want to eat salmon, whatever the case may be. They're competing for something, one of these resources. Now, the competitive exclusion principle states that two species cannot occupy the same niche. Now, what we mean by this is they can't occupy the same niche within the same habitat. If they did, one of them would be driven to extinction because one would get it, the other wouldn't. So they can't operate in the same niche. Once again, if they did, one species would get driven out. Now, it may not be extinction, but it would be from that habitat. So the competitive exclusion principle, two species cannot occupy the same niche. So what we see happening is resource partitioning. Now, resource partitioning is just slicing up the pie. We have this area to live in. Who's going to live here? Who's going to live there? Who's going to live in this place? Kind of like in an apartment building. All these people want to live in the apartment building. Well, they live in different apartments, right? Ooh, I'm going to live here. I'm going to live there. I'll be here. A family. We tend to take up different rooms. Now, 2 or 3 of you may all have the same room, but typically in a family, different people or different groups get different rooms. You're slicing up that pie. Now, typically what happens over time, we have evolution. These species all exist here and they're competing for the same things. But if they remain there, they have found ways to slice up this pie. Typically, they wind up evolving specialized traits that allow them to share these same resources. So, certain species may only use part of the specific resource. Maybe they use it at different times. Bats want to feed on insects. Sparrows want to feed on insects. We could hit a lot of things that eat insects, but bats come out at night to feed on the insects. Sparrows feed on them during the day. Bats evolved to feed at a time when they didn't have to compete with anything else. So this is part of that resource partitioning, eating at different times. It might be in different ways, where they use it, etc. For that one, let's take a look at the warbler back here. Now, this is warbler as a genus, but we have some different species here. Now, I'm just going to use the common names for them. Now, if you look in the trees are highlighted yellow in certain parts. So, the Blackburnian warbler tends to spend its time in this top part of the tree. Now, if ecologists have looked at these and mapped them out, these particular birds tend to spend more than 50% of their time in this part of the spruce tree. So they're both getting insects from the spruce tree, but they've kind of carved up where they want to hunt, and a lot of times for some specific types of insects. Certain types of insects live in these different areas, and the birds are competing for the same space in the same tree, but they're going after some different things. So the Blackburnian is kind of in the top. The black-throated green warbler tends to be in that kind of middle-ish section. The Cape May warbler right in the top, but notice the Blackburnian is the top and kind of that outside edge, so some overlay. The bay-breasted warbler kind of has that little V shape sort of in the middle. And then the yellow-rumped warbler tends to hang out just in the bottom. So this is an idea of this partitioning of resources, or as I call it, slicing up the pie. And you kind of see how these birds have decided by evolution over time to slice up the food within the spruce tree. So, interspecific competition. Let's look at another one, the honey creeper. Now, the honey creeper is a bird that lives in Hawaii, and they have evolved into many different species, kind of type of species of honey creeper. And this is through natural selection. Once again, this is kind of part of that resource partitioning. The common ancestor, blue, found its way in Hawaii in some way, and as it was going after food, different ones, different beak shapes, just a tendency. This bird was born with a slightly sharper beak, and it gave it an advantage of eating this type of food. This bird was born with a bigger, thicker, stronger type of beak, passed on that trait over and over, and now we have speciation. Different species of bird living in a similar area, slicing up the pie for resource partitioning. Now look at the different types of birds and see if you can figure out what they would probably eat. So their beaks have specialized in evolution over time to allow them to eat either insects, seeds, fruits, or nectar from different flowers. And we see a wide variety of beak. This one kind of at the very top there, this long curled beak. What is it gonna eat compared to, say, the bird right across from it with a red head and kind of a short, stout beak? Different beaks give them an opportunity to slice up the food pie, whether they're going after insects, seeds, nuts, nectar, you name it. One of the ways that it can happen. The next term, predation. Predator-prey relationship. Now my two words here are benefit, harm, but in this case it's actually benefit, death. Benefit, death. One species gets a benefit, it gets the food, the other dies. Or if it's the sake of the prey, it gets away, it benefits, it gets to live another day, and the predator dies. I mean, if the predator can't actually catch any prey, it would die. But anyway, for me, predators, predation, my two word, benefit, harm, but specifically benefit, death. One dies. If one benefits because it gets food, the other dies, I'm in a predator-prey relationship. This has a really strong effect on population sizes and limiting factors. Because if I have a lot of wolves in the forest, I'm not going to have as many deer. Now, of course, I get too many wolves, the deer population goes down, the wolves have to do something. The deer population comes up real high, I may get more wolves. So we get this evening out of populations because of them. Now, methods of predation. How do things go about being a predator? Well, there's a bunch. Herbivore, you think herbivore is not a, well, it's going to eat the corn and the corn's going to die, right? So, I mean, it eats the grass, that grass dies, at least that part of the grass dies. So an herbivore may be able to walk, swim, or fly to the plant that it's going to eat on. Now, it's only a predator that's actually eating, consuming the whole plant, now if it's just taking a bit. So that's a bit of a stretch, but still they can fall into this category. Carnivores, which is what we tend to think of as classic predator-prey, well, they may use their speed, like a cheetah, really fast to get after it. They may use flight. A hawk can fly and swoop down on something. They use their specific senses, like the shark with their lateral line. They can sense the vibrations from a long ways away. Bats can use their echolocation to send out the sound and hear it with super keen hearing. So a lot of different ways predators go about finding and catching their prey. Now, a lot of predators also adapt camouflage and even chemical warfare. Now, camouflage we get. The Arctic fox is white. Now, the Arctic fox could wind up being predator or prey. Fox may be going after a rabbit, but it could be prey to something else or larger, polar bear, something. But it's white to blend in with its environment. A snake will tend to adapt to its environment. Once again, a snake can be both. It could be a prey for a hawk, but it's going to be a predator to a frog or something, or a mouse, something else. But they'll blend into their environment so you don't see them until they're right on you. Chemical warfare. Let's stay with our snake. The rattlesnake. Chemical warfare. It's got its fangs, right? It can inject venom into its opponent until the opponent gets paralyzed or dies, then it can safely eat. So a snake doesn't want to eat something that's still struggling. It's very vulnerable. So it can use chemical warfare as a way to attack its prey. And venom is one of the more common when we're talking about predators. There are some others when we talk about the prey getting away, which we'll look at. They also adopt protective shells. The turtle has its shell around it. Trees will get bark or spine. Many plants have thorns, etc. This is a way to defend themselves because they're the prey. Things are coming, the herbivores are coming after to eat them. Cactuses, etc. They develop this very tough outer coating, whether it's bark, whether it's a shell. A lot of our fish are trying to eat clams, abalone, etc. Our sea otter friend likes to eat abalone, so the shell protects the muscle, the critter on the inside. So lots of different adaptations to try and look at that. Now we've looked primarily talking about the predators. Camouflage, they can jump out and grab it so you can't see them coming in. Well, let's talk about definitely the way prey have evolved to avoid predators. Now, some of the bark and shell, etc., are some of those. Well, the camouflage, like the Arctic fox back here. It's white, it blends in that snowy environment. And actually the Arctic fox has its white fur in the winter time, but it sheds that and has a brownish fur in the summer when there's no snow on the ground. So camouflage for the Arctic fox, and many different types of insects, stick bug, etc., blend in with their environment. Some involve this chemical warfare. Now, with the snake, we talked about it had venom. Well, some of the prey, like the bombardier beetle, it can actually spray a chemical onto its predator coming to eat it, giving it a chance to get away. The monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly, this beautiful thing, well, it tastes terrible. It has poison actually in it. It's really bitter. Not that I've ever eaten one, but so they say. So birds, if they eat one once, they never eat it again because of this chemical that's actually inside of the butterfly. It gives it protection. Poison dart frog. And right here, real bright, etc., that secretes poison on its skin. If you actually try to eat it, once again, not venom, it's poison. If you eat it, you die. And this is the big difference. Venom is injected, poison, you eat it. If something tries to eat the poison dart frog, and it dies. Now, I forget his name, but there was a biologist that came up with ways to try and identify if something's probably poison and how bad. So basically, if it's very beautiful, and small, it's probably poisonous, like our friend the poison dart frog. If it's very beautiful and easy to catch, it's probably deadly. Now, this might mean eating it, not just grabbing and catching and look at it, but it's a good sort of rule of thumb. Something's really bright and pretty colored and it's small, it's probably poisonous. If it's really beautiful and brightly colored and it's very easy to catch, it's probably deadly because it doesn't have to worry about trying to get away. All right, camouflage, chemical warfare. Let's look at a warning coloration. Well, the monarch butterfly again. Once something's eaten one of them, they don't want to eat it again. So that brightly orange, black, and white coloration serves as a warning. Hey, here I am. I'm not trying to hide. You don't want to eat me. The poison dart frog is the same thing. When something encounters it once, or you stay away. You learn to stay away. The viceroy butterfly. You throw it up. And I'll put a picture here side by side of the monarch and the viceroy. The viceroy butterfly does not have chemical warfare. A bird can eat the viceroy butterfly and it tastes just fine. I'm sure it's a lovely tasting butterfly. But the viceroy looks like the monarch butterfly. It's hard to distinguish. So it has this warning coloration. It ties into the next one, mimicry. So it has this warning coloration. It's saying, hey, I am a monarch, don't eat me. No, in fact, it's not a monarch, but it's really hard to tell the difference. And if you're a bird, you just avoid it altogether. this mimicry. Now, a lot of camouflage is mimicry to a degree. You're trying to look like, you know, the moth looks exactly like the tree bark, so it blends in, or the king snake looks a lot like the coral snake. So mimicry is very common in the prey world. Don't eat me, I'm probably dangerous, because I'm just trying to look like something that does. And then we have things that are behavioral strategies. Now, the snake caterpillar up here is one. It's hilarious. Looks like a caterpillar, but if you kind of touch it, it forms its body into look like the head of a snake. And you're like, whoa, it's a snake. And you back off. So it's a behavior. It's not just, it could fall into mimicry. It could fall into this warning, but it's specifically behavior, because only when it's touched or bothered does it do that. The pufferfish or the blowfish, it'll be this little looking fish swimming around, or maybe this big, and you get up and you give it stress, or it thinks it's under stress, and it puffs up real big, size of my hand. Ooh, all of a sudden it's really big. It's not going to fit in my mouth. So, behavioral strategies. Anyway, these are some of the ways prey have evolved over time to avoid their predators. So let's take a look again at this threat to kelp forests. Once again, pull out in there, not going to hit a lot of time because we went through it. So the giant kelp seaweed, it's anchored to the bottom, but it has these really long sprouts coming up. It's very fast growing, and it's resistant to storm damage. When you start to get a big storm, like we have hurricanes here, they have cyclones come across, or hurricanes, or just big storms, the kelp forests tend to ease the waves down. The waves have, the energy has to pass through the kelp forest, and it cuts it down, so they don't get as much damage inland from it. They also are home, and they support a lot of marine plants and animals. Now, the sea urchin prey on the kelp plants. Predator-prey relationship. Sea urchin eat the kelp. And then the sea otter helps control the sea urchin population. And this takes us to coevolution. Coevolution, just what it sounds like. Evolution, but where two things do it together. So this predation plays this role in natural selection. Since you have something that's trying to eat you, you want to try and get away from it. Once again, you happen to be born with a marking that gives you a benefit and you're able to get away. So you live longer, reproduce more often, and you pass on that trait. And then the other organism begins to realize what it is, and they develop a trait. Once again, they're not thought of, they're not planned. It's an adaptation. It's a minor change over time that benefits one species or the other. And in this case, we wind up getting two species kind of evolving in tandem, very specifically together. Any animal that has a better defense against a predator tends to live longer, has more offspring, passes on that trait. So changes in the gene pool of one species can actually lead to changes in the gene pool of another. Let's talk about bats and moths. Now we know bats eat insects. Well, specifically certain types of bats tend to feed on moths. Well, the bats are sending out echolocation, bounces off the moth, and they can zero in on where the moth is. Well, certain moths have developed better hearing. Once again, randomly one could, as we all know, some of us hear better than others. A moth was born with better hearing, passed it on. So some moths can hear this echolocation frequency. And whenever they hear it, they drop to the ground, or they start doing very erratic flying behavior to keep away from the moth. Bats, on the other hand, some have developed different frequencies, so they use a different frequency. And some have stopped using the frequency because other moths have developed the ability to give off their own sort of frequency, which confuses the bat. Well, if the bat turns off its echolocation, it can hear the frequency and zoom in on that. This is coevolution. The moth evolved to be able to hear the bat, and then it could fall out of sign, so the bat evolved to develop different strategies in order to find the moth. Coevolution. This is where two things evolve together in tandem over time. Once again, doesn't happen overnight. The honey creepers we had up as well. Some of the flowers in Hawaii have these really long stems, so that really long beak allows them to exist. You remove the honey creeper and that flower can't exist because it's about the only thing that pollinates it. Anyway, works both ways. Coevolution. Now we're going to get to parasitism. Parasitism. Benefit, harm. One thing gets a benefit, the parasite. One thing gets harmed, the host. So this is one species. It either lives on or in another organism. Now parasites do harm the host, but they rarely kill it. If they kill it, then they lose the benefit of the host where they live. So you may have tapeworms, and these can live inside of our intestines or in the intestines of animals, etc. We eat the food, they get a nice warm place to live, and we give them the nutrition. Sea lampreys. We see lampreys on different types of fish. Shark are kind of a classic one. They kind of hang on the side of it and take some of the food. These are different from remoras. Remoras is a different relationship. They don't harm the shark, they just cruise along with it. A lamprey latches on and takes food from the fish. Yeah, I say shark. We think of remoras with shark. Lampreys affect a lot. And then fleas and ticks that we get on dogs, cats, goats, you name it, affect anything. So they can be in or on. One gets a benefit, one gets a harm. Then we're going to talk about mutualism. Mutualism, pretty much like it sounds. Benefit, benefit. They both get a benefit, whether it's nutrition or a protective relationship. Sometimes they're both getting food, sometimes one gets they're both protecting each other, sometimes one's protecting and the other's getting the food. But it's some sort of benefit-benefit relation. Now this is not cooperation. It's not like they go up and go, hey, let's take care of it. They're just both looking out for number one, but they both get a benefit. Like our clownfish back here lives in the anemone. The anemone is a stinging type nettle. It stuns most things and then it eats on them. But it doesn't harm the anemone. So this is mutualism. It gets the benefit in there. It actually can hit prey and get food from it as well. It gains protection and it feeds on the waste matter. But the clownfish protect an enemy from certain predators and they'll eat parasites. Parasites come on, the clownfish eat them off. So they both get a benefit. The Egyptian plover and the crocodile, kind of known as a crocodile bird. The bird gets a free lunch, if you will, picks out little bits of meat from the crocodile's teeth, and the crocodile gets a free dental hygiene visit. Benefits both. The oxpecker bird and cattle or cows, many. Now, in this case, it's mutualism. They're both getting a benefit. The oxpecker is getting food off of, it's eating the ticks and the fleas off of the animal. The animal gets a benefit that it's getting this removed, and the bird often will squawk, make loud sound when predators come by. So the bird is getting food and being able to move around with the animal. The animal gets a benefit that the ticks are getting pulled off of its body and it gets an early warning if any predators are coming by. Mutualism, benefit, benefit. The last one is probably the most difficult, or at least the one that students tend to struggle with the most, and that's commensalism. This is benefit, meh. Okay, I know I'm not using harm, but it is. It's benefit, meh. One gets a benefit, the other doesn't even know it's going on. Like my relationship with Taylor Swift. I like her music, I think she's kind of cute, so I get a benefit. Taylor Swift doesn't know I exist. Many of you have relationships that are commensalism. Yeah, I know, I get it. Benefit, nah, I get a benefit, she doesn't even know I exist. One has either no or very little effect on the other. So when you're reading a situation, is one benefiting and the other doesn't get anything out of it. Epiphytes, I'll throw one up here. We see these in Florida a lot of times in terms of Spanish moss, but in the jungle, epiphytes are everywhere. These are plants that grow on a tree branch or a tree limb or in the tree, but they're not taking anything from it. They're just sitting there. The tree doesn't even know it's there. It's like a fly lands on my back. If it's not crawling around, I don't even know it's there. I can't tell it. So this is, the epiphyte gets a benefit, a place to be and hang out and get its sunlight. The tree doesn't get anything from it. It's not helped, it's not harmed. A bird nests in a tree. Tree doesn't care. Tree doesn't know it's there, not hurting the tree, but the bird gets a benefit. Cows and egrets. Now the oxpecker ate ticks off of the cow. The egrets don't do that. Here in Florida, you drive around, you get outside of the towns at all, you see in the fields, you'll see the cows, you see those white birds. They tend to be the egrets, sometimes known as cattle egrets. The cows walk around, stir up the insects, and the egret eats the insects. Now these aren't insects, these are like grasshoppers, whatever's down in the grass. They're not bothering the cows, and the egrets eating them aren't helping the cows. So the egret gets a benefit. It gets free lunch. It gets to see where the food is. As the cows stir it up, cows get nothing out of the relationship. The egrets don't do anything for them. Commensalism, one of the last ones there to look at. That is it for section 1. Make sure you know those 5 types of relationships, the core study on the southern sea otter, and we'll see you next time when we talk about ecological succession. Take care, guys.